books talks about a friend of his died, and he and his wife went to visit the widow shortly after his friend had died. And he said they were put to bed up in an upstairs bedroom, and sometime during the night, he said, I awakened and I felt there was a presence in the room. And he said, I woke up and I saw a figure standing at the end of the bed. And I said, Joe, is that you? And it was my friend. And he didn't speak, but he said he smiled, and he just stooped down and pinched a bit of a tuft of wool out of the carpet, and he held it before me, and then he dropped it, and I saw the tuft fall to the floor, and then it disappeared. And Buechner said I was shaken by the experience, but also oddly comforted. And I went back to sleep with some difficulty, and he said I awoke the next morning, but I could still feel the reality of that vision, and I told my wife about it. And she said, well, look, over here on the carpet, there's a tuft of wool that has been pulled out of the carpet, and there it is on the floor. And said we both stood there with the oddest sort of feeling. Buechner goes on to say, now, I have no idea what to make out of that experience. But be well assured, we're all busy making something out of our experiences. We're all busy trying to figure out what's real, what's going on in the world. And he said, I'll tell you, that moment, that experience, it suggested to me there is more going on in the world than we have been able to describe. What if there is this world in which we normally function, what if there's a kind of veil between this world and more of a world? He said, I would be hesitant to work up some kind of theology of the afterlife or philosophy of life out of such an experience, and yet at least it does suggest there is more. Now, I've mentioned that episode from the works of Frederick Buechner because, well, this is an academic institution, and you're engaged here in probing what's real, what is the truth about the world in which we live. And institutions like King are basically creations of the modern world, out of modern ways of knowing, modern ways of explication. Where do we get the modern world? Well, I would say a good place to date the birth of the modern world is in the 16th century. There was a young student in Paris by the name of René Descartes. And René Descartes, studying about the age of an average student, college student here, and the King of France died, and Henry of Navarre was to accede to the throne. He was a young man. He represented in the minds of many a kind of a new age, a new time of enlightenment on the way to his coronation. He was assassinated, and all of France was thrown into a kind of collective depression at what had happened, and including young René. And for him it was a disillusioning moment, that the future seemed uncertain. The past and tradition seemed to be undependable, a deceit. And so Descartes went into, the story is, into an unused oven, a room without windows, and goes in there, and he begins a systematic program of thinking. And how does he do that? Well, one, he does it in a room without windows where you cannot see out the world, and he begins to think. And how do you think? And Descartes' method of thinking was doubt. Don't believe something just because your mother told it to you, or because your tribe has believed that, or the church has taught it. Think for yourself. Doubt your prejudices, your prejudgments. And he began this way of how do you find certain knowledge? How do you get down to what's really real? Through doubt. And cogito ergo sum, we learn from Descartes. I think, therefore I am. That is, who are you? Well, you're mostly a brain. You're mostly a thinking creature. So your thinking is the very essence of humanity. Thinking defined as stripping yourself bare of all preconcepts and prejudgments, and strip yourself down and think. And thinking is a solo enterprise. And thinking, what you do is to try to remove emotional engagement from what you're thinking about. Step back, objectify. Don't make kind of emotion-laden judgments. Step back, think. And thus you see the birth of kind of modern ways of knowing, the empirical method that produced science. This all, I think, could be said to have its origins there, and Descartes' way of thinking. And you get to true knowledge through a method of questioning, a method of doubting, and that's the way most of us learned this method in high school biology. Okay, let's now explain the frog. Okay, how do you explain the frog? Okay, first, split the frog open, take out the organs out of the frog, and then take the organs out and split the organs down to the tissue, and then get down to the, put the tissue on the microscope, label the various parts of the cells in the tissue. Okay, now, we've explained the frog. Of course, somebody says, well, the frog died, though. Well, yeah, there's some byproducts of this way of knowing. And this is kind of the modern way we get at things. We strip things down. That's why you have here at King, you have different departments. You have biology, but you have physics over here, and you have literature over there. And the way you understand things is to take this bubbling, mysterious reality and you break it down to, because we can only look intensely at one little piece of reality over time. Well, no wonder a lot of people graduate and say, wow, I learned a great deal about a very small area, but it didn't kind of add up to a big picture of anything. Well, again, maybe we are part of a generation learning some of the limitations of modern ways of knowing. And why is the traditional American way to grow up? First, you got to abandon your family, abandon your parents, come away to a college in the middle of nowhere, and detach from your tribe, and you come here, and well, again, since we owe that to Descartes, the way you think about something is through detachment, through engagement, through objectification. This is what philosophers of later called the denuded observer. That is, when you're trying to understand something, it's important to strip down of as many commitments and relationships and prejudgments as you can, and then just think. Therefore, that's the way you really get at the truth. And so you take a course in religion, and the professor says, I know a lot of you, there are some of you who may still be religious, but you're going to need to put that aside now. We're going to try to study this objectively, and we're not going to get all emotionally engaged in it. We're going to try to really understand it, and that's objectively. Modern ways of knowing. And yet, increasing numbers of people in places like this are thinking that, wow, in the modern world, there is a sense in which we're suspicious that our understanding of ourselves and the world did not grow, but shrank. That there's a sense in which there's a lot that's going on out there you're not allowed to talk about in places like this. That because it doesn't fit into modern ways of understanding. We had a racial incident on our campus a few years ago, and a group of students was very upset about this incident. And so I was trying to kind of meet with them and advise them, and so we decided we would have a old-fashioned kind of teach-in back from the 60s. Nobody go to class that afternoon, and all out there in front of the chapel, we would have speakers, all planned by the students, and we were going to talk about race and the problems of race on the Duke campus. And so we all gathered out there, and the meeting began with a young African-American woman calling us to order, and she said, all right, let us begin. All right, let us pray. And she led us in prayer in Jesus' name. This was followed by a Buddhist student who beat a drum and kind of put us in touch with the rhythms of the universe. This was followed by the president of the Interfraternity Council, who started screaming that he had benefited from the suffering of others and didn't even know what his privilege had cost others, and he was possessed by the demon of white racism, and who would deliver him from this demon? Well, this so moved the next speaker that he sang a African-American spiritual a cappella. We'd been out there for about 40 minutes, and nobody had really mentioned race. And the Episcopal campus minister leaned over to me and said, don't you just hate it that we live on this godless secular campus? And I said, wow, the kids don't seem to have gotten that message, have they? Well, when it was all over, I said to the students, you know, you're smart. Who told us we had a race problem? That's not like a Bible kind of concept. Maybe this is a God problem. Maybe, okay, we've heard from all of the governmentally subsidized, socially approved methods of explication, psychology, economics, political science, sociology, thank you. Now could we hear from a richer, thicker description of reality? I think we're in a kind of a postmodern time where increasing numbers of people are thinking the modern world gave us a lot of descriptions of the world that have been helpful, but also flat. In a sense, there's more going on there than our modern methods of thinking have allowed us to think about. And that's all will lead in to a pre-modern description of reality that's found in a pre-modern book called the Bible. Here from John 2, and I'm throwing this out to you this morning as most offensive Bible story I can think of to throw out in the middle of a college campus, modern, thoughtful people. So here it is, one of the strangest moments in Jesus, many strange moments. John 2. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." They filled them to the brim. Then Jesus told them, "Now draw out some and take to the master of the banquet." And they did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He didn't realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and he said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have become drunk. You saved the best until now." This was the first of his miraculous signs Jesus performed in Cana in Galilee. He thus revealed his glory to his disciples, and they believed in him. Okay. How do we think about this? John is going to write a gospel, and he's going to say, "I'm going to help you think about Jesus." Okay, good. All right. Here's the first of Jesus' signs. John doesn't call them miracles. They're signs. They're pointing beyond themselves to something else. We're in a world here where things are not what they first appear to be, where there is more going on in any given moment than you first expect. They're at a wedding in Cana of Galilee. John says this was the very first sign Jesus did. There are a number of things that bother you about it. One, the location. Luke, you may know, begins his story of Jesus by taking Jesus to a synagogue, a religious gathering. Yeah, because Jesus is going to do something religious. John, first sight you get of Jesus is at a wedding. Well, it's not really at the wedding, it's at the bash after the wedding, the party. And so it's the wrong non-religious location. The other thing is it says it's the wrong time. Jesus' mother comes to him and says, "They've run out of wine." That's what you get when you show up with 12 single men at a party. They've run out of wine. And then Jesus says, "Woman, what has that got to do with me or you?" Not exactly the right tone to take with mom. And then she says, "Do whatever he tells you." And he says, "Fill up those washing jars with water. Fill them up to the brim." And then the steward in charge of the wine feast tastes the water, and it has been transformed to wine. And 180 gallons of wine, which I'm a Methodist, but still, it's got to be a lot of wine. And then the steward makes this impudent remark. At most of these parties, what they do is they serve the good wine first, and then when people are drunk out of their mind, they bring in the cheap stuff. But you save the very best wine until the end when people are already drunk. Wow. What kind of comment is that? And then it's the wrong time in another sense, in that it's the first of his signs. Jesus walked along the road. There was a dear person lying at the side of the road who was crippled, who couldn't work, totally dependent, and said, "Oh, Master, let me walk." And Jesus says, "Okay, I'm going to do a sign on you. Here, stand up, walk, become a taxpayer, get a minivan, vote Republican." And no, Jesus, the first of his signs is this kind of pointless, stupid thing where the wine gives out, and then suddenly there's 180 gallons of wine, and let the party continue. It's a kind of Easter moment. There is death of the party. The wine gives out, and then suddenly there's an overflowing. This occurred on the third day. Remember, he rose on the third day. It's like an Easter story. If you got a story that's good about Easter, why would you put it in the second chapter? Mom, he says, "This is not my time. It's only the second chapter of the gospel. I got stuff to teach, stuff to do." And then the story ends by saying, his disciples believed in him. What did they believe? Jesus has not said one word, has preached no sermons, done no teaching. They believed that he had violated the church policy about alcohol in the fellowship hall after a wedding. They believed that he should go into catering. What did they believe? And, the disciples stumbled away from the wedding after a lot of wine and said, "I believe." And then John says, and they saw glory. It's wrong time, wrong place, wrong sign. I wonder if this is John's very skilled way of saying, hey, something new has been inserted into our reality. Jesus, the Son of God, this extraterrestrial one, has come among us. And he hasn't, it isn't like he's come to do something religious. He's entered into everything. Now everything looks different, and you're just spending time at a wedding, and next thing you know, there's a breakout of this inexplicable, unusable glory. And people stumble away and say, I believe. This is a very different way of knowing. And it's not different because it's Jewish, or different because it's primitive or pre-scientific. It may be, and this is a kind of postmodern judgment, it may be it's just a richer, wider way of rationality than that which often passes for rationality around here. A notion that there is more, that in the words of Frederick Buechner, there's a kind of veil, and there are moments when that veil is pulled back for just a moment, and we get a peek, we get a hint of more, and when the veil is pulled back, somebody staggers away saying, I believe. I have seen glory that was not self-produced. I think one of your challenges of being a modern person in a modern world is that there's a sense in which the world is all self-constructed. You come into the world and we say, okay, it's your world now, go for it, put it together. And the world, what's what out there becomes something that's put together in here. Remember Descartes, I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore the world is. The world has no meaning other than that meaning that I'm able to put together. And it takes you at least 4 years in college to kind of construct all of that. We are self-constructed, and one reason is that in the modern ways of knowing, there is no information, there is no revelation that comes from the outside. everything is exclusively produced inside here. You get into a discussion about what's what, and you say, well, say you're talking about politics, and somebody says, well, I think the economy is in the shape it's in because of that. No, I disagree. I think the economy is in the shape it's in because of this. And then somebody says, God has shown us that. There's a moment of awkward silence, and then that person is driven out of the conversation because that person is not playing by the rules. And the rules are that all knowledge is got to be that which is available to everybody, any thinking, sensitive, intelligent person. And it's all from within. There is no external word. There is nothing that is revealed. The Gospel of John, that story there at the wedding at Cana assumes that what if what you know is partly gift, grace? What if partly what you're thinking is not simply what you have been able to produce on the basis of your experiences and your methodologies, but is also what is shown to you, what is given to you, grace. In a discussion with Bishop Spong, a great debunker of the Christian faith, he said to me, how can my daughter, who has her PhD in physics, possibly believe in the bodily resurrection of Christ? And I said, well, I don't know. We've all known a lot of limited PhDs in physics. I mean, has your daughter traveled widely? Has she ever been outside New Jersey? Does she enjoy surprises? Does she have any humility which suggests to her that she might be shocked by the truth about things? I mean, you know, just to simply say, my daughter is a modern, North American, well-educated Western person, therefore she stands in judgment upon all reality. She has the sovereign judgment about what is what. Well, the Gospel of John, I think, is luring us into a very different world. And it's not that it's a primitive, pre-scientific, pre-thought world. It's just a world that brings to it certain assumptions that there is more going on there than we can adequately describe. More than our methods of thinking can get at. More than we can use for our self-protection or our attempts to control the world. Maybe the world is under guidance and control of something beyond our control. I was talking to a young man this summer who had just become a Christian through a Lutheran church. We've got some Lutherans here today. And just a little throwaway comment to them to appreciate myself. And I said, well, what have you enjoyed about being a Lutheran Christian? And he said, I realize I have spent my whole life. I said, how long has it been your whole life? He said, I'm 23. I spent my whole life trying to make my life. I went to college, and the purpose of college is trying to figure out what do I want to do with my life. Who am I, really? When you peel away everything, who am I down deep? Who am I? What do I want to do? And he says, when you get baptized, the church tells you who you are. The church says, we know more about who you are and were created for than you do. And so we're just going to tell you. And so they don't care what your name is. They just lay Christian on top of you and live with it. And Western, North American type people, that world is peculiarly difficult for us to think about. And yet that's one of the great things that I like about, I think, the under, 40 crowd or 30 crowd is, I think in certain interesting ways, in music, in art, in other ways particularly, you're straining at the limits of modernity. And you, speaking of Lutherans, I was in Philadelphia, and a young Lutheran pastor said to me, she said, I got out of Lutheran seminary in Philadelphia in my first church, inner city parish, and I was surprised a lot. I started seeing young adults in 20-somethings show up in the church. And so usually that's supposed to be a hard age to reach. But so I got them together and I said, what do y'all want to do? And they said, we want to do Bible study. And he said, okay. Wouldn't you rather like look at various current issues? And they said, no, because you probably know more about the Bible than you do about current issues. And I said, okay. And so I decided we would study the book of Acts, the Acts of the Apostles, because most of these people are unchurched, don't know a lot about the church, so I thought we'd start out with that. And so I started out the first session, and I said, now people, in the book of Acts, we're going to hear about, there will be some miracles, there will be some miraculous healings, there will be angels. But now, we're not going to get hung up on all that. That is a primitive, scientific way of talking about a deeper spiritual reality and all, and said demythologizing and all. After the second session, to show you how little I knew about young adults in Philadelphia, I said to them, look people, if you have personally seen God out on the interstate, if you have had a buddy of yours miraculously healed, if you have personally encountered an angel, keep it to yourself. We don't have any more time to go into that kinky stuff. Let's just stick with the story here. And she said, how ironic that I have been trained to minister to all these skeptical, standoffish, critical, modern people, but by the time I got into ministry, there weren't any of those types left. They were all people yearning to talk about what they wouldn't let you talk about in school, and to get at that which only the artist can take us to, like the artist John. Well, I'm saying I think there may be a sense in which some of you may be part of the first generation to be able to read, to listen to a story like I just told you from John's Gospel, and read it without prejudice and without constrictions that we have imposed on ourselves in Europe and some of its colonies for the past 200 years, otherwise known as the modern world. I'm wondering. Back at Duke, I had this student who said, I met him in chapel, and then I invited him home for lunch one day, and I said, I'd just like to get to know you better, and so made sandwiches, we sat down, and I said, okay, Jason, tell me about yourself. How'd you get to Duke? He said, well, I was a teenager from hell. I made my parents' lives miserable. And I said, well, that's not that original story. We hear that here a lot. And he said, but when I was 16, my parents had me committed to this mental institution. And I said, really? I didn't know you could do that. That's great. And he said, but I got out of that place in a week or two, and I hitchhiked to Chicago, and I started living on the streets. And so I worked as a prostitute. And I said, oh, well, we don't hear that story that often. American Express card, and I ran up a couple $1,000 worth of stuff before the police got me. And so then I was convicted, and I was sent to Joliet prison. And he said, that was hell. And I said, gosh, when you said you were bad, I thought it was stuff like in high school with cheerleaders, and I didn't know. Wow. He said, well, anyway, at Joliet, this older prisoner befriended me, and he, every night for lockdown, he would read a chapter from the Bible to me, because he was very religious. And I didn't know anything about the Bible. And he said, we were like in Luke's gospel, and we're right there in the middle. Maybe that was a reason about the story about the lost coin, lost sheep. And he wasn't a very good reader. It took him forever to read this stuff. And so we finally, when he finished, suddenly in that cell, it was like Jesus walked in there and body slammed me against the wall. And Jesus said, I own you. I got plans for you. Cut this crap out. And he said, it really scared the shit out of me. So I got my high school degree, and I got out of there, and then I got in Michigan State, but I always wanted to come to Duke. So anyway, I'm here at Duke on a full scholarship, and I just want to tell you that story. And I said, wow, that's an amazing story. And he said, I said, are you telling me that story because there's no way I can explain my way out of that story? He says, no, I'm telling you that story because you're a preacher, right? And I know you preachers, you're always grubbing around for illustrations for sermons and stuff. And look, we got Easter coming up in 3 weeks, okay? And I feel sorry for you. You got to preach in Duke Chapel with all these academic types, and we got Easter coming up. And the reason I'm telling you this is I'm